Hello everyone, I'm Mike from the Self App, and thank you for listening to the Self App podcast. This is a show where we discuss all things good thoughts, good words, good deeds related, and interview people passionate about being their best self and who are helping others to be their best self too. Some of the segments include Coaching Clinic, where we talk to psychologists, motivational thinkers, and life coaches. Book Club, where we discuss and share reviews on our favourite books. Startup Spotlight, taking a pre-seed and more often than not non-techie view on starting a business and running a business. Health and Fitness Hustle, where we provide tips, tricks and training from experts. And eSoteric Edge, a look at hidden or secret philosophy and how it can help you be your best self. If you haven't already, please download the Self App, where we deliver you a collection of tools to help you be your best self, and 3% of all our profits are donated to charity. Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in today. Today, it's my privilege to introduce you to Jason Fraser. Jason had a passion for aviation from a very early age. While his peers were playing sports or socialising on weekends, Jason was taking flight training and building up flying hours as a teenager. Leaving school to go on to university, Jason earned his Bachelor's of Aviation degree and pursued his lifelong passion of becoming a pilot for a commercial airline. Jason has lived in Vietnam and has flown all over the world and continues to work for a major international airline, though furloughed due to COVID. Jason has a passion for investing, including crypto, camping, paragliding, kite surfing, and basically anything that man would do. Jason resides in Sydney with his wife and 2 children and has a fascination with esoteric philosophy and its influence on government, economics, and society. Today, we're going to learn a little more about esoteric philosophy and how it can help you be your best self. And for our listeners, all opinions heard herein are personal, not those of our employers, and are expressed purely for entertainment purposes only. So Jason, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to explore esoteric philosophy?
Nico, good to see you, mate. I'm very excited for this project of yours and stoked to be here with you. I don't know if your listeners know our sort of background and how far we go back. I was thinking about this morning. It's nearly 30 years coming up that we've known each other. And really that started along with you, I would say. Having gone to Catholic school as we did, we always had this spiritual acknowledgement in our life. And I'd say one of the biggest turning points in the understanding of that was when you and I both chose to take religious studies at a higher level than the minimum required. And that really had a big difference. We've talked about this before, how rather than just learning how to recite the Bible, we started in 2-unit religion, learning about other religions, and rather than focusing on Catholicism, it was more about spirituality. And that was a big awakening for me, to get an understanding of what else is out there and look at religion rather than being forced on us, as had been for the last 13 years of Catholic school. Now it was a choice, and a choice in spiritualism, what you choose to believe and how to pursue that consciousness in your own individual way. So that's how really, I guess, I started along that path. But then I kind of lost my way and went to the hedonistic life for a while. Enjoying the good life for a while before now sort of coming back to it in middle age. And when you start having more time to focus on that spirituality again and start asking questions. And I don't know whether it's a middle-aged thing where you start questioning, is there more to this life? But you sort of, I have anyways, come back to that spiritual side of things and starting to look at which path now I think I'm interested in, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this as well, because so I've been looking at the left path versus the right path, and doing a bit of reading on which one to choose, if there is a choice now. So the right path, I'm not sure how deep you're going into this, but the right path generally is, my understanding is that it's sort of the more community orientated, more the philosophy that a high tide floats all boats. So and it's more of like a collective consciousness that's being improved. So whereas as opposed to the left path, which is more of an individual path, more a path of you follow your own bliss. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now, which is it's interesting, sort of reading things about left path versus right path. They both have the common element that they're both striving to improve consciousness and improve the self and seeking enlightenment, and two different pathways to get there.
So, you know, we have actually gone into a quite a niche area here, and I want to take a little bit of a step back before we come back to what you've just described, which is left-hand path and right-hand path. Can you give us your personal interpretation of what the difference between esoteric and exoteric, and you did touch on it earlier on, but you know, just for our audiences who may be tuning in for this for the first time and going, what are these two numpties on about? You know, can you define the two natures of what is esoteric philosophy or esoteric spirituality versus exoteric? Because that's a really good place to start, and this will help us as we go down the rabbit hole.
I guess so. The definition really of the esoteric is that it's understood by the few, isn't it? That it's fairly particular, and I guess by construct, then you're going to have people in that esoteric philosophy that want to be there, that are searching for something, whereas I believe that exoteric is perhaps more an organized construct that maybe you join by choice, or maybe you're kind of, or not pushed into it is not the right word, but maybe you join it by default, as in that's the way that your family always has been. So you go along with that, or in your community you sort of go along with that.
Yeah, it's a really good way to help define it. I'm probably going to throw my 2 cents on the top and say that exoteric religion is more institutional. It's you know, the outer versions of each, and most people are very familiar with the doctrine of Christianity, of Islam, of Buddhism, of Hinduism, of Judaism. Esoteric philosophy is taking an internal or inner path that I guess the likeness I would put it through to anyone who understands psychological concepts is think about an external locus of control and an internal locus of control. And I think esoteric philosophy aims to travel down the internal locus of control. And this is where we come back to the point that you described earlier, is when you're faced with this internal locus of control, you're kind of confronted with true choice, right? And this is all about the will, and the will and you talked about it a little bit of following your bliss, but you know, there's a very famous left-hand path that's called Aleister Crowley, who you know, is very famous for saying, you know, do thou will. That is the whole of the law, or the law of Thelema is doing the will, your personal will, or your higher will. But coming back, I want to share a little quote, if you don't mind, that I think really summarizes the difference between esoteric philosophy and taking an internal locus of control, and exoteric religion, for lack of a better term. And it's going to be taken from the Bible itself, from 1 Corinthians 3. And it starts with Paul talking to God's fellow workers, and it says, "And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as unto babes in Christ. I have fed you with milk and not with meat. For hitherto you were unable to bear it, neither yet now are ye able, for ye are yet carnal. For whereas there among you envying and strife and divisions, are ye not carnal and walk as men? For while one saith, I am Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are ye not carnal?" And while this is the original King James version, really, you'll find that Arthur Edward Waite, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, kind of talks about this in the Holy Kabbalah, his book, The Holy Kabbalah, and he says that the exoteric religion really is the milk for babes. It's kind of very early on. It's a very base foundation, but esoterica tends to be a lot meatier. It's a lot hardy. It can be very hard to bear, and what goes along with those who follow also an external locus of control is the carnal life, what many in other philosophies might call the cycle of moksha, or birth and re-death, as opposed to those who are of the spiritual, which is, awakening, for lack of a better term, the sense of will and divine purpose. So coming back to a little bit about you talking about earlier, I really want to focus on your journey, which is why I'm so thrilled to have you on the show, right? Because it excites me. And every time you pick up the phone to me, I'm like, whoa, this is cool. Or damn, I want to go and read about that. Or I want to learn about this too, because it's really cool. But tell us a little bit about, you kind of said you're on the precipice of a choice. What do you feel you're going to get out of one versus the other? And what has brought you to the ledge you're at now as you're looking at taking your journey further down the rabbit holes?
Yeah, it's interesting. Originally, when I was looking into this mystic philosophy and found the left and the right path, I was naturally drawn towards the right path, perhaps because of the past being involved with the exoteric, as you were just describing. And the philosophy that a high tide floats all boats. It's I want to help the community, and the more people that can be raised in consciousness, the better, right? But so then I start reading some more, and although the left path is given a connotation as the dark path, I've come to understand that better, and starting to question now whether the left path is more suited to my sort of way and what I'm searching for as an individual. So now, rather than being a group effort, I think at this stage I'm more interested in self-enlightenment, in self-help, if that makes sense. So on face value, when they say the left path is the dark path, the right path is the light path, everything's dialectic, as you say in your book, the good, the bad, light, dark, warm, cold, and all those negative connotations are given to the left path. In reality, I don't think it is so dialectic. I think, as I was saying before, they have the same aim for enlightenment and betterment of the self, increasing consciousness. It's just the different pathways to get there. So yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well, Miko, where there is no sort of dialectic between good and evil, dark and light. One can't exist without the other. And do you choose the path to enlightenment for the greater good, as perhaps this whole self app of yours is doing? You're putting that message out there, which is fantastic. Is that, do you sort of understand that that's probably more the right-hand path, and perhaps I'm leaning more towards now the individual's path of the left-hand path for self-betterment?
It's a great question. It's probably not something I'd thought about. I mean, if I think about what the self app is about, it's definitely about, in many ways I find it as a middle path. And what I mean by that is, if you think about what you talked about, which is, I want to discover my own will, right? What the self-app does is give tools for an individual to take those and much like you're walking into a store where you buy clothes, for example, and you go into stores and we send quotes every day, and I have some pretty challenging quotes, and a lot of them are from esoteric thinkers from both left and right paths. And there is always this tension between, I think, free will and determinism. And you've got, even today, you've got thinkers on the intellectual dark web saying there is no free will, it's all determinism, and then others are saying, well, no, it's not. And as you discover this journey, you find that there's actually a spectrum of both. There is a degree of free will and there's a degree of determinism. And my view is this, right? I'm not here to, and the self-app is not about informing you how to think. It's, in many ways, I hope, allowing you to take reflection on what you think. So really, just like your own decision, your choice is at a precipice now, and you're looking at the left-hand path. I think that's the right way to go about helping others. I think you can do both at the same time. You can help people be their best self and on an individual level find what they want, but at the same time benefit the community, which is one of the huge aims of what we're trying to do, because we've got a philanthropic model. And I want to get one of my own personal intents is helping people rise above to a degree. What we talked about earlier is having any form of narrative imposed on you, right? And that's my view, is you got to think for yourself, you got to feel for yourself, you got to pursue your own will. And I think that that's absolutely the best way for people to move forward. I also don't think that as you discover one path, you exclude the other. I think Jung, to me, said it best, where he said, in order for a tree to reach up to heaven, its roots must delve down to hell, deep into hell. And I look at it that way. I think there are aspects of our personality that you can't just cut off and you can't just deny. I think for me, what defines the left-hand path is a little more along the lines of hedonism, and just I've heard one thinker on the path say, hey, the path to liberation is through ultimate sin and sinning, and you kind of got to discover the divine spark in orgiastic kind of crazy self-debasement. And I think to a degree, Crowley, as we both know and have read a little bit about Aleister Crowley, he pursued a lot of avenues in attempting to unlock and uncover his own true will, and in his communication with his daemon. And for those who kind of don't understand the concept of the daemon, very Socratic term, which says that every human being has access to a kind of an intelligence, almost like an AI. You'd think about it as a personal AI, like Tony Stark had in Marvel, where he talks to his AI and back and forth. Well, for Socrates, his own personal daemon was this intelligence that was non-physical, that he could tune into through practices, rites, rituals, and purification, and get access to knowledge and wisdom from the other side, or from outside the four dimensions that we live in. And Crowley accessed one of these daemons as well. For those who know his story, I don't need to go into it today, but I think like human beings, we're all individual, we're all unique. There's not going to be a path that suits everyone. I think you've got to just take one step at a time, unlock your own journey, and then for me, it's about rectifying it back to what honestly is best for you, and as least harmful for others as possible, right? Do no harm is ultimately right. the aim for me, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy speaking with you, because we have these discussions, and but today isn't about me. I kind of just you threw me on the spot.
I think that's super interesting, and I 100% agree with you that Crowley was left path. And initially looking at the two pathways, that's what deterred me from going left path, because it has these negative connotations. Crowley was associated with the left, the dark magic sort of, and the dark elements are associated with the left. But then it's interesting too to sort of think that you can't have the darkness without the light, that even if you pursue the right-hand path, there comes a point where they start teaching left-hand path magic as well. And perhaps the left-hand path, you know, being more self-orientated, free-thinking, it's central of the self. It's not, I started thinking, yeah, you know, like it's not just so orientated with the dark arts and the dark things. Maybe it's just somebody on their own journey, you know, as Joseph Campbell talks about in The Hero's Journey, right? That's more of an individual thing. Going out and learning and coming back to then benefit society, I guess. So, and the left-hand path is almost a way of you're not seeking social acceptance. You're doing this for you, not for anybody else. So, without delving into the dark side of things, and the satanic side of things, which doesn't interest me whatsoever, I think the left path is sort of more my leaning at this stage. You know? And I guess an interesting question then is, you know, do you think that, talking about Joseph Campbell's The Hero of a Thousand Faces, you know, do you think Jesus was on the left-hand path as an individual?
Yeah, good question. I don't, but I also think there's so much confusion with left-hand path and right-hand path. And look, if we were to get into this today, people would think we'd pop DMT, ayahuasca, or something like that, right? Like, and it comes down. Look, there's a lot of. If anyone online is tuning in for the first time, I don't want to get into kind of Enochian script and the Zohar and many of the Hebrew and Judaic mystery novels, but really a lot of this can be found in the Zohar and the very huge volumes of the Zohar and the Kabbalah, and you know, really, I think. And the main reason is that they're effectively two trees. There's the tree of life and the Kabbalah, and then there's what's called its shadow or its offshoot, which is the cliff off. And they have correspondence along this tree, and it's said that, you know, the dark followed the light and kind of cloned it, but you know, and in very nefarious ways. You know, it's intimated that as you would always. Again, it comes back to this world of duality that we live in. But I think, for me, as opposed to this sense of returning to oblivion, you know, and I see a lot of people in this space who follow the Kabbalah who say, you know, your consciousness basically needs to be really refined and ultimately abandoned. Like your own personality, your own individuality needs to be surrendered completely and dissolved and destroyed into supra-consciousness or back to source or back to God, right? And some of this kind of doesn't sit well with left-hand pathers, and where you talk about the really extreme ends of left-hand pathers, because it links back to the fallen angels and the concept of the rebellion that happened, as opposed to, you know, the first sons of God were these angels, and they were pure spirit. And when God created man, you created this fusion of spirit and soul. And all were made to bow down before Adam, and he was defined as holier and greater than all of even the highest choir of angels. And there were a group, naturally, that were like, fuck that. And this is where the start of this rebellion happened. And you know, again, you can kind of see the allegories in the nature of again, this individual versus collective consciousness. And I think, you know, there's different paths of Vedanta, and I'm going a long way of saying, I think Buddhism, and at least some of the exoteric Buddhism and Vedantism, some of the Hindu philosophies talk about this concept, this similar annihilation. I don't tend to think that's the case. You know, if you look at what Christ's message was, and I'm talking the Christos, you know, Yeshua who became Christos. In an esoteric sense, I think that there was something different. I think there was definitely a dying to a personal attack, dying to, you know, we started with that 1 Corinthians quote about the carnal and the spiritual. And I kind of think of these as two worlds, or almost two universes that stand alone. And I think you've got to die to one to break free of this cycle of birth and re-death. Birth and rebirth and reincarnation, and you know, interestingly enough, Christianity did have reincarnation as a tenet at the Council of Nicaea. Yeah, at the Council of Nicaea, it was implemented. I think it was Origen or Clement of Alexandria, one or two, and then one of them was excommunicated about 100 years later after they're like, no, we pull the reincarnation story, folks. It's one life, and then you go on to heaven. But really, what I think Christ was about was definitely dying to a personal, to a carnal life, to a slave to your ego, a slave to your passions and desires, a slave to your narratives, and even to, you know, your lower, call it your limbic brain, and raising a higher consciousness. But I also think it was about liberation. I think there was, when you hear about the bride and the bridegroom, which he's talked a lot about Christ, and particularly in Revelation, I think there was a sacred marriage between this sense of perhaps universality, which may be called the kingdom of heaven, and then the kingdom of earth. And I think there is an influx that was driven into this bride and bridegroom unity. And for me, this is my understanding of what the true right-hand path is about. It's not about kind of an immersion into kind of a communist, totalitarian, one unity of you know, the overarching lord of the lower realm, the demiurgic Jehovah, you know, I am a jealous God, you come back and unify with me. I kind of think it is a reflection of being able to express your best self, like the truest and most refined and virtuous aspects of your personality as a unique individual that you talk about, but tapping into all of the non-physical, wonderful, love-based intelligence that flows through you as you reach that level. So to me, I probably think, having said that that's a very right-hand path aspect, but I think it's another middle path version of becoming, you know, the Word incarnate. So that would be my take. I'm, you know, again, this is all opinions for entertainment purposes, and I don't know, but it's my take that's the difference between Christ, and it was probably very confronting to a lot of mystics at the time that you know, he went down that path. But the reality is, I think, you know, again, we've all got to find the best way for us to, in truth, escape the carnal cycle, and what being subject to a carnal law really means, and that being kind of, like I said, as a washing machine of just, you know, old patterns, old habits being repeated, and you stuck on the wheel of fortune, right? And a bit of a slave to fate. And I think that's what being spiritual means, but I think it also comes at a pretty big cost. So, you know, I'm yet to understand that. But, you know, I think also you kind of need to, like a junkie, you know, they say that if you're a junkie, you got to get to the point where you hit rock bottom, because it doesn't matter who from the outside loves you or wants to see your salvation. Until you make the decision internally, you ain't never getting off the smack, right? I would say it's probably similar in terms of moksha, or in terms of the cycle of rebirth, until you kind of get to the point where you're like, damn, I'm sick of, you know, being led by impulses, being driven by impulses, being a slave to, you know, my addictions, my booze, my drugs, my sex, all of that kind of stuff is coming right back to what you said at the start. You know, is there more? Is there more than that? And if there is, how do you break the cycle and get out of it so you're less subject to a kind of a universe that is, I would say, in carnal law, a universe is almost hostile, because you're trying to survive. You're in that survival brain, and you're constantly finding these patterns that reinforce what's already subconsciously in your mind, as opposed to transcending that to being spiritual. And you probably bear a heavier burden and a heavier yoke, or a heavier cross. Maybe that's the inference that Paul was making. But in that state, as being bearing a higher responsibility, you probably also, it comes with certain bonuses or certain benefits which are less subject to the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune, but also an offer that you have to serve. You have to try and better your fellow man. So, I mean, I'm like you. The reason I got you on the show, and I'm super eager to make this a semi-regular spot, is, you know, I'm discovering this myself. We're both students on a journey. This is just
you blow me away every time, Nico, with your knowledge and understanding.
Well, speculation.
And just when I think I'm convinced one way, you know, I listen to you and like, now I've got to start all over again.
Dude, it's all speculation. You know, like this is what it is. It's for entertainment purposes, but you know, it's a safe space for us to both say, you know, and ultimately what this, I hope our listeners get this too, is, you know, I'm not here to convince anyone, and I know you're not either, Jason.
Absolutely.
We're here to accept each other and say what's right for you is right for you, what's right for me is right for me. But as you follow your path and as I follow mine, just do no harm. You know, like as long as you're not infringing on my sovereignty and I'm not infringing on yours, you know, I think coming back to that, do that will, then that you're all going to be fine, and you're all going to be able to live the life as a quantum unit in a spooky universe that you are, and have the fulfillment you want, as am I, and hopefully our audience gets as much fulfillment out of their lives as possible too.
Absolutely. We're all searching for meaning, and we're all going to take different paths to get there, and that's what we're all about.
Well, it's fascinating, you're right, because talking about meaning, you know, you shared with me an article on Viktor Frankl the other day, and he came up, and you know, I actually was getting kind of a synchronicity moment where a few other people were pinging some Viktor Frankl stuff, and you know, I guess this is where my my question on the validity of the left-hand path was Viktor Frankl, for those who don't know, was the founder of logotherapy, and he was also an inmate of multiple concentration camps, including Auschwitz, under the horrific conditions of Nazi control over Germany and Poland and a number of other nations during World War II. But in his experience of the concentration camps, you know, he's very famous for coming back to a central point, which is, you know, it kind of doesn't matter the conditions, you get to choose your attitude to the conditions. And that was a pretty profound, and when you think about the conditions that produced that specific point of view, to me, it's both exasperating and completely humbling, right? Because I don't think anyone today can even fathom the depravity of what it's like to have your mother, father, wife ripped from you. Your wife dies while you're in a concentration camp, and then you spend your time observing other inmates and how they respond, and how they respond with humor, and how those situations keep you alive, and
looking for meaning in that.
And I think, you know, he also, for me, I would say Viktor Frankl certainly, whether he studied any of esoteric philosophy or not, lent to the right-hand path. And the main reason is this, right? And you know, he talked a little bit about those who take drugs to access higher degrees of consciousness, and he said, you know, we'll try and find meaning through LSD. And he was a big opponent of those who were taking LSD at the time. And you know, I think, you know, as he came out, I certainly think Aldous Huxley was you know, probably writing Doors of Perception, where he was running his mescaline hits, and now today it's really commonplace actually for many people to talk about ayahuasca and taking DMT, and you know, the impact of what that specific chemical has on you being able to perceive or break through or shatter through potentially dimensions of perception. But Viktor Frankl came back to a point, and he said that for those who are using drugs to achieve that, you're taking a blind alley. And that resonated hugely with me, primarily because of what he went through. But I thought, you know, it comes back to this carnal versus spiritual, and milk for babes and meat for those who can bear it. And I think maybe that's the case. I mean, I certainly think there's validity in sin, and you know, if you need to pop mushrooms or LSD or whatever to kind of get a sense of there's something more in life, and if that helps put you on a path, then to your point, great, right? You're on a path. It's helped you refine meaning, and it's helped you make sense of reality and your world and your place in it. But I think if you're using that, it's going to be like a crutch. And I certainly think you're going to run down blind alleys, and sooner or later, and I having, you know, for those who don't know about Aleister Crowley, he died with a heroin needle in his arm and screaming to Satan. He said, you know, Satan, leave me or get out. And I think that to me harkens well to what we're kind of talking about, right? Like, to a degree, explore your senses, get to the point at where you kind of have had your fill and taken of all of the fruits, and then consider that maybe it's not going to lead you on the right trajectory. You may end up down a blind alley, and maybe that's where, you know, for today's session, I probably, you've just stimulated this thought, but it reminds me a lot of the prodigal son, right? And the prodigal son, for the story, who don't know, and I think it's pretty ubiquitous, but I'll relate it really short term, is, you know, you had a father who owned a plantation, really wealthy plantation owner, had two sons. The younger son came to his father and said, this is slavery. I don't want to be a part of this. You know, there's more to the world than this. Can you give me my inheritance up front so I can go out and bam? And the father reluctantly went, well, yeah. And so this son went out, blew his fortune on women, wine, partying, and was addicted to this lifestyle. And then in the end, he got into hock with some moneylenders, and there's a moneylender aspect that comes into this. And he became subservient because once he ran out of that credit and couldn't pay it back, and his father was like, you got your share of the inheritance, you cut off, I'm not bailing you out anymore. He was on his own, and he ended up in servitude to the moneylender and had to work on the moneylender's plantation, funnily enough, as one of the lowest workers. And it was said, you know, there's an extrapolated story, I think, where he gets beaten by other workers, he gets robbed, his robes get taken, he's left naked and bleeding, and he's in this horrible, horrible state. And I don't know the ways or means by which he gets word back to, you know, his father on the plantation, but he kind of says, look, I will do anything I can to get the hell out of this horrible condition on this plantation. Can you please pay my debt and save me? And what ends up happening, or it may just be he worked off his debt, I don't know the nuance of the story, but in the end, he does get his liberty after enduring incredible suffering and seeing what it's like, almost what the fruits of carnal law are like, and how those who don't have a good mindset treat workers, treat people, treat their fellow man. And he runs back to the father and he kind of says, Father, thank you. I will humbly work on your land wherever you need me to, because I know you're actually a really good man. And, you know, his father embraces him, put a fine cloak, and puts a ring back on him. And his other brother's like, what the hell are you doing, treating him like a valued son? But he says, you know, like the shepherd that has 99, you know, sheep and one goes missing, how valuable it is to get that one sheep back. Like the sense of, you know, there's a herd mindset and an individual mindset that we come right back to. And I think it's incredible that an individual goes out and explores who they are and what they are, and then makes a decision, an informed choice of will to come back to better meaning, whatever that is, you know, to have meaning, and hopefully that's in service of others, but also to recognize what good is and what good leadership and good governance is. And that's why I love that story. I think it ties perfectly to what we're talking about today. Does that mean that's right-hand path or left-hand path? I think it's middle path. I think it says that you kind of got to experience the depths of hell to understand the heights of heaven. But I think, you know, it's also up for every individual to do that. You can't enforce it or impose it or do what institutionalized religions have done and do. I certainly think if it's offered as a framework and a base from a narrative perspective, and you offer parables the way coming back to your representation of Christ did, and a number of other brilliant leaders do, is offer parables and stories that make people think and help them inform a choice, then absolutely. But at the end of the day, I don't know. We're all here discovering this, and this is why I love speaking with you. It's a super fascinating concept.
Always, Miko, and always learn so much talking with you, mate. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, man. I mean, you really pushed me today into an area where I didn't think I'd be doing much of the talking. But while we wrap up, I want to ask you to leave our audience, if you would be so kind, with what's a key piece of insight or advice you can offer listeners to help them be their best self?
You have to do what makes you happy. Obviously not at the expense of others, but pursue what makes you happy and do more of it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to our rabbit hole of an opinion session on a really,
I didn't think it was going to get that deep.
Neither did I, but we went there anyway. So, Jace, to you, thank you so much for coming on the Self App podcast and sharing this today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Miko. I'm so excited for this Self App and where it's going and what it's going to achieve. It's going to be fantastic.
So much. Well, look, I hope our audience gets a kick out of it. And speaking of our audience, thank you all for listening. And before you go, I ask you, do us a good deed. Share this with one other person. Please leave us a 5-star review wherever you tuned in. For more best self goodness, you can find us on social by searching for the Self App. And from us to you, keep up the good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and continue to level up your best self. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.